what does muscle memory mean to you? And like having muscle memory or being able to build muscle memory, you hear that term a lot. So I'm really curious about that as far as like, what does muscle memory mean to you?
That's a great question. And a muscle memory, the way most people use it is a bit of a myth, but really just incorrect. So, muscles do not remember movement pattern information. Muscles do have, there is a muscle memory, but it relates specifically to strength training. So if you have an example here, let's say you have two guys that are going to start going to the gym together. They haven't worked out in like 15 to 20 years. One of the guys worked out in college. Maybe he was a college athlete. The other guy didn't. The one guy that is previously strength trained, he will be able to regain those previous levels of strength much quicker than the person that is not strength trained. That's muscle memory. And it has to do with the complexity of a muscle cell. Like it
Like the
just,
muscle tissue itself, right,
yeah,
is built that way, so it like reacts the way your mind is
yeah.
kind of asking
So
it
the,
to, right?
the nucleus of the muscle cell is able to have that memory, for lack of a better term, of previous levels of strength training, so you can adapt much quicker. The way most people use it is to talk about a movement pattern or a motor pattern, and I know the point is repetition is how you automate a movement pattern, or that's the thought. However, it doesn't happen in the muscles. It happens in the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. Remembering how to perform a motor pattern, like riding a bicycle, is the exact same thing as remembering your childhood phone number. They're both long-term memories that have been stored. Now, yes, the end result is different, right? Riding a bicycle is much different than repeating a phone number, but it's essentially the same thing. So automating a movement pattern is trying to do something enough and do it mindfully so that it becomes stored as a long-term memory. So what we tend to call that, or really in the literature, it's referred to as a mental representation, and that can mean a variety of things that we can get into. But really, muscle memory, means you repeat something enough and it becomes automated. But I think it's important to remember that it doesn't happen in the muscles; it happens in the brain and the spinal cord. The reason that's important is because mindless repetition does nothing. A waste of time, really. You have to pay focused attention, which is hard for people to do, but building that automated movement pattern takes 100% focused attention on that movement pattern in order for it to become automated.
Okay. What about talent, or like you hear this, like this person has a ton of talent, but when you like correlate that with top level performers or an expert in their field or whatever they're doing, how much does talent actually play into that at achieving that?
Most of the time, whenever people use the word talent, they think of you are born with a unique gift. You are born with a unique set of skills, and I do believe the Lord gives us a particular type of gift. I do believe that. But whenever you really start to dig into talent being related to something on a genetic level, because that's what people would think. I think a good example is hand-eye coordination. So people think, well, I had a TikTok for a hot minute, and I decided that I didn't really like that. But I remember this one guy, he commented on one of my videos, and he said, the top ropers in the world have improved hand-eye coordination, and that's genetic, right? So that would be a talent. And he's correct in that there are a set of genes that are related to improved hand-eye coordination. But first, you can't make a claim like everybody has something unless you actually test everybody and you know that they actually carry that set of genes. And no one's ever really done that. But what we see across other sports like Major League Baseball is, even the best batters in the world, they don't have improved hand-eye coordination. What they have is domain expertise, where they would have improved hand-eye coordination specific to playing baseball. And that is learned over time, years and years of hard work, that mindful repetition, and just gaining expertise in the field. So I don't think we're born with any particular talent related to something like roping or playing a sport or something of that. It's something that's built over time and sort of refined, and you eventually reach an expert level.
Okay. So let's dive into these things a little bit. As far as I think how to start it out is like, what about practice separates someone who's just competing or being there to someone that's like really getting to that high level of expertise or really achieving things as far as through their practice to competing, and then kind of with this, give me a little bit of your background as well, and then these kind of different types of practice
Yeah.
and how you view that.
Yeah, for sure. So my background, going back a little bit, I did my graduate degree in rehabilitative science, and with this, it was a lot of physical therapy type of stuff. I worked a lot with clients and patients that had like low back pain, shoulder injuries, those types of things. And what I learned through all of this is a big piece of that is reteaching people how to move correctly. Our body's very adaptable, and so you would a lot of times we will adapt like a limp or something to try to stay out of pain or these types of things, and you have to reteach that person how to move. So that really started to expose me to this idea of motor behavior, motor development, motor learning, and I explored that further by in my doctoral studies. I have a doctoral degree in behavior, and with this, I continued to dive into that motor learning and skill acquisition. And that sort of exposed me to, or really opened up my eyes to practice behaviors and habits of some of the best in the world. And so really for the last decade, I would say I've spent a good amount of time researching that, digging into the research that's out there. I've done a number of conference presentations on things related to learning how to move, refining skills and those types of things. So that's really my formal education. As far as a roping background, I roped as a kid. It was really the only sport I ever played. I tried football for a little bit, but way too much physical activity for me at the time. I roped all the way up through high school, did pretty well on the high school rodeo stuff, and then after that, I decided to just sell everything and go to college. I didn't know if I'd ever really start back roping again or not, but I did pick it back up about 5 years ago, and so that's when I've already completed my graduate studies and that type of stuff, and I had dug into the practice research and those types of things. And then getting back into roping, that's where I really started to see that, and I don't mean this to sound offensive in any way, but it seems like the rodeo industry in general is about 10 to 15 years behind whenever you're talking about mental performance, these ideas of practice and those types of things. I think like what you do here at X Factor is a huge step forward because you're giving people a really big part of what they need in order to perfect their practice. But as I got into this, back into roping and started talking to people, kind of like you and I talked about earlier, I've had this conversation probably 100 different times, and I've really found three things. And the first one is a lot of people don't know. They don't know that there are 40 years of data that have been performed been collected on thousands of athletes or performers from many different industries. There's been a lot done on musicians, and one of the reasons is because it's easy to track that. But you have musicians, chess players, rock climbers, tennis players, gymnasts, soccer players, right? There's a variety of these different sports and all this data that's been collected. And what happens, like over that amount of time, you're able to identify commonalities or consistencies in all of these different domains to where you can really put together what I'll call like a practice blueprint. And I don't have a practice blueprint. Like I'm not trying to sell an ebook or anything like that. But you can put together a very clear path, a practice path to help boost your performance. Now, I'm not saying that if you follow what we're going to talk about today, you'll become the next world champion. I don't know that that's the case. We don't control outcomes. We'll talk about that a little bit in goal setting. But what I am saying is if you put some of this stuff into play in your practice, you can become very, very good. You can maximize your performance to whatever level you want to, and or whatever you can based on the sacrifices you're willing to make.
Okay. So the kind of this first stage is this like kind of naive or like kind of green, like, hey, I want, like, I'm roping, but I'm just going and we're roping steers.
Yeah.
Similar to me, like golf, when I first started playing golf, just hitting golf balls. Like, I might watch a few videos, but really you just kind of got it, you know what it's supposed to look like, and then you're trying to duplicate that. And I would kind of group that in that first phase. So there's like, obviously, the more you do it, you probably will see some improvements, but it's going to be really sporadic in this naive stage, right? And that's, I think, and that's really where X Factor, like, that was when I decided, hey, we need this. I feel like we're really missing how to practice with a purpose. That was like the first like slogan that we kind of came out with. It was like, hey, I really wanted people to be able to work on little things and continue to add that to their game and kind of understand it, right? So I think that's essentially the kind of the first stage is like there's not a lot of structure. There's just like, hey, we're just kind of going out there, maybe having a good time, which I think that's great. But it's, if you are wanting to excel, you're leaving a lot of things out of your control, right? And I think what we're really trying to get to is like the stages of this. So that first stage, I think that kind of summarizes up pretty well. It's like, hey, that if you're going in there, like, it might go good, it might go bad. You might have good weeks, you might have bad weeks, but you're really not getting to a rhyme or reason of what's going on in your practice, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And it's called naive practice for a reason. And you can really summarize it or characterize it by enjoyment, comfort, and confidence building. So if you're leaving each practice session with those things, you had a good time, you stayed within your comfort zone, you never did anything that made you feel a little bit uncomfortable, and you feel confident at the end of it, you're probably not actually getting better. And I think a good way to, or a good example for this is just like you said. Like, let's say somebody wants to get into team roping. I forget the stat, but is team roping, it's like the quickest growing amateur equine event or rodeo event, something like that, right? So a lot of amateurs are getting into it. So let's say you buy the horse, you get some ropes, and you want to start. Of course, you post it on Facebook, and you get hundreds of great comments about what to do. But let's say you do actually, you get a coach and you get a lesson. You know, it gives you some lessons. You go back to the practice pen, and you start to get better, just like you said, right? You get to where you're maybe not hitting yourself in the face as much. You can catch a few of them. You go get a few more lessons. You slowly kind of refine. And you get to a point to where if you draw a good steer, it holds his head up, runs down the middle of the arena, maybe a high loper or something like that, you're going to catch him. But then there's always one where, maybe he ducks his head a little bit. Maybe if he moves to the left a little bit. Maybe if he runs a little bit, you're going to miss that one. And that in itself kind of leads to the, one of the more powerful negative predictors of success called the self-fulfilling prophecy, to where you have this idea like, man, if I draw a bighorn steer, I'm going to split the horns. So what happens? You draw a bighorn steer and you split the horns, and so you say, hey, I knew it. But anyway, so in the practice pen, that's what's going on, and you've gone in with some buddies on some steers, and anytime one starts to duck his head, or if you don't really like him, you trade him in or you score him. So the point is you never consciously focus on your weak points. And you're just kind of going through the motions of you're out there catching, you're riding, you're having a good time. Let's say you get to the point where you can catch, 6 or 7 out of 10. You feel pretty good. Maybe you win a little bit at the jackpot. But the point is, like you said, it's fun, it's enjoyable, it's comfortable. You're feeling good about yourself, and so you never really push past that. And that. I mentioned that mental representation, all this stuff happens in the brain. The brain's an adaptable organ, just like the muscles. So if you don't challenge it, if you don't push it past its comfort level, it never adapts. It never has a reason to grow. And so that, in a nutshell, is naive practice. And that's where most people are. They have fun, and that's fine. Like you said, right? Go out there. It's an opportunity to relax. You enjoy being with horses. Maybe you can have a couple of beers with your friends or whatever. Perfectly fine. But you're probably not going to see much improvement. A little bit sporadic, like you said, but not a consistent improvement over time.
Yeah, your roping is going to be pretty situational.
Yes.
You'll win when it fits your situation.
Yes.
And when it doesn't, you obviously are not able to.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about taking this next step with our practice. And one thing I'd like you to continue to tie in with this is enjoyment and avoiding like burnout, because this is probably the one thing we see a lot with like the younger guys that come here that are really like they're starting to figure out, hey, I'm not where I want to be, and I want to get to that next step. And that seems to be a real common thing is they were just roping and they had an idea and like maybe got some tips and a few like a lesson or a few things, but they've just kind of casually practiced. But they're starting to get what I would say like serious about it and really trying to take it to the next step. So avoiding that, like kind of ruining the game, like putting so much pressure on the game while you're trying to take the next step. Kind of take me through that as far as, hey, what is the next step, but also like keeping enjoyment as well, and kind of that mentality of like why you first started doing it too.
Keeping the enjoyment, that's a tough one. I'm glad you brought that up. We'll get to that. So the next step, so after naive practice, the next level of practice is called purposeful practice. And whenever I say it's called naive practice, it's called purposeful practice. That's how it's been identified in the research. I'm not naming it that. It is, a lot of this research was done by a guy out of Florida State University, Anders Ericsson. So he really started off the research in the late 1980s, early 1990s. So he's the guy that really laid out what deliberate practice is, how it works, and that type of stuff. Purposeful practice is a huge jump up from naive practice. It's generally characterized by goal setting, which really gets into a whole thing about how to set the right type of goals. Also, self-monitoring, and you do that through feedback. So those are really the two key things with this purposeful practice is the goal setting and the self-monitoring via feedback. The self-monitoring piece becomes really a whole big conversation in itself that maybe we'll get to in a little bit, because in order to monitor yourself, you have to have the experience and study the sport enough to know, hey, that's not the way that was supposed to be. What should I do now, or why was it different? And that takes a great deal of what they would call conceptual knowledge to know. These are the rules. This is the way it should be. This is the way it works. Like all of these types of things. To jump to the part about the burnout and enjoyment, I've done some work with some youth athletes, youth baseball players, and what you really start to see is there is a point where someone will say, you know what, I'm willing to take that next step. I'm willing to make that next set of sacrifices. And along with that comes sacrificing some of the enjoyment. And there's this transition to the joy starts to come from the work rather than the outcomes. So it is, I love working at this. I love waking up Monday morning and getting back to work. That's the joy I find. I love working with horses. So the joy starts to shift to where the focus is on that level of effort. And of course, the winning is always a fun thing. But there's kind of like a shift in where they're getting their joy from. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So essentially like winning, catching, probably like dopamine hit, right? And so your self-worth's going up, gratification, like you feel good, right? So as soon as you essentially start trying to do new things, there's going to be struggle,
Yeah.
right? Because you're attempting things that you cannot do, and you're really starting probably for the first time to really get out of your comfort zone and analyze what you're good at, what you need to do better. So understanding the struggle is kind of the way now.
Yes.
That's kind of the beginning.
Yeah.
And that might mean you might not catch a steer for a few days. It might mean you hit some pretty good slumps, right? But not looking for the gratification of, hey, I caught every steer at the practice pin. Like it might be like, I missed everyone all week in the practice pin, but after 2 or 3 weeks of it, now I can rope a head ducker, I can throw one coil, whatever it is. Like I now have that shot.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I like the way you mentioned the struggle there. Again, some youth athletes, and like a lot of times their parents are like, well, how do I get my kid out of the slump? You don't. You let them stay there. The longer the slump, the better they're going to be at the other end of it, right? Because that's where the work is, right? That's where you, like I think about this too a lot of times, roping the dummy, roping steers. You had mentioned before really getting into this type of practice, you had mentioned like what kind of separates the experts from the others. The one key differentiator is the amount of time spent in solitary practice. Solitary practice is whenever you're with yourself, you're working through these struggles, you're trying to perfect something. It's not roping at an event, jackpot. No, that doesn't count. Oftentimes, it's not when you're roping with your buddies. It's whenever it's you're there with your thoughts, your rope, your dummy, and a goal. And again, across many different sports, that's the key differentiator. The best musicians in the world spend 3 to 4 thousand more hours in solitary practice than just the good musicians. And I think that's a key is, and again, those same things, whenever you interview those performers, they don't like it. They don't have fun. Practice is not fun for them. Winning is fun. Performing well is fun, not the practice. So again, it is just kind of like, it's hard to do, right? Like I know all the things and I can't always do all the things, but it is you just embrace it, right? Hey, this is tough right now. I always say the Lord gives us what we need, not what we want. So for whatever reason, this is your struggle. Work through it, figure it out, practice different things, watch different video. But it's like that's the point. That's building that foundation from which you can then build upon. So embrace it. Learn as hard as it is. You got to learn to find the joy in the work.
So you just said earlier, like the longer the slump, the better it is when they get out of it.
Mhm.
And I guess if I'm going to try to relate to this and kind of really try to help me out with it, but it seems like I've gotten to a stage where my bad practices, I kind of like them a little bit more because I would think about them more and I would really like analyze it. Like that night, I would be thinking about it. And when I wake up, I'm thinking like I would just start obsessing a little bit over what went wrong. And it really kept me sharper than as opposed to like the really good practice sessions.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like I'd have terrible days after those, like, or like those would be like my really like lack of performances at rodeos or ropings when I was having a lot of really good practice for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But it seemed like if I had there's like a fine line I could find where I was still missing a few, but still my confidence kind of stayed right there. But the big struggles and the hard times, like, can you elaborate on that a little bit more as far as like, do you know what that does to your mind? Or like, I guess that's what I'm kind of going with it is, hey, what about being in some big struggles? Does it really reinforce it mentally? Like, hey, this is now not a problem. Like I've solved it, or I don't know.
Yeah, in a way. And it always goes back to building connections in your brain. And I obviously talk about that quite a bit. But whenever you perform a motor task, whether it's good or bad, right? The brain does not judge good performance versus bad performance. It's just, hey, this is what we did. There is a sequence of neurons that fire, right? Brain cells, down into the spinal cord, they fire and they produce an action. So whenever we first start learning, it's called the cognitive phase or the cognitive stage, and things are really choppy. And that's where you're thinking about it, right? You're thinking about it like this. I don't really know how to swing. Like what's going on? How do I do this, right? Things are slow.
Cognitive meaning you're thinking.
Yes,
the whole time.
Yes. But then all of a sudden, the sequence of neurons fires the right way, and you do it right. You're like, wow, that was it. And you repeat that. So that sequence of neurons fires again. Each time it fires, it gets stronger. There is a special type of specialized fat, essentially, that will wrap around this sequence of neurons that enhances how quickly that signal can fire. That's called myelin. It has a myelin sheath around it that can build. So each time you do that, that gets stronger and stronger and stronger. So you lead up to the associative phase or stage of learning, which is where you start to make the connections, right? You start to feel it a little bit more. You still got to think about it, but things are smoother. You get a little bit better. But then finally, it's the autonomous phase or stage, which is where everything is automated, and that's really what people are going for. Working through those three stages can occur for anything. If you're trying to rope a head duck or somebody, a steer that drops their right horn, well, you need to go back to that cognitive phase. So you need to do something in your environment that forces you to pull things back up into conscious thought. I love the rope smart dummy for that reason, right? Regardless of what the pole does with the angle or whatever, it's hard. So then it forces you to bring things back up into conscious level. And then you practice it, right? The neurons figure things out, they fire, you reinforce that, and it just kind of takes time. But I think understanding the more you work at that, the harder that is, and the more time you spend on that one thing, the more robust is that motor pattern, right? That motor sequence becomes very, very strong and effective because you've honed in on it so much. I'm sure you've heard the expression or saying, don't fear the guy that's learned 10,000 kicks. Fear the guy that's practiced one kick 10,000 times.
My favorite one of like when I really started working at my roping, that was one of my things that I tried to really adopt. Was I wanted one run that I thought could win, and then I would build everything out off of that. So I thought that was essentially what I wanted to do. I wanted to have a go-to run that I did not need to think about.
And that's really the way it works is you practice that one thing over and over and over again. And to perfect it, right, I'll use air quotes, to perfect that, whatever perfect means, takes time. Sometimes it takes years. And that's just...
It does take years, I think, right? It's going to take years, probably especially roping, just because of the logistics of practicing, right?
Yeah, and I would say years to if you consider all the variables that go into it. If you want to do one thing, right? If you wanted to, let's say it's a head ducker, pretty good evidence. Whenever I say evidence too, like I know there's been no research on team ropers. I know that. Right. So what we have to do, we have to draw some connections, and we understand that there are variables out there. The horse, the cow, like I get it. But let's say if you're just roping the dummy, focused effort for about 20 hours, you can become very, very good. But so if you take 20 hours and you're tracking it, right? That's 20 hours of 100% focused attention, which is hard to do, right? It's hard to maintain focus. You can become really, really good at that one change of a motor skill within about 20 hours.
Okay. I'm going to stop you right there because there's a couple things I want to kind of go back to this struggle. So we're going from cognitive, we're thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And the more we think about it with the struggle, that essentially is creating a stronger bond in your brain of as you figure it out, and it's making that neuroconnectivity stronger. Yeah. And as you get it to where it's autonomous, that's what creates that strength and that connectivity to work so well, correct? Like, so what I'm saying is like, hey, we're in a slump and we're grinding it out through a slump for weeks and you're really, really struggling and it's really hard. The harder that is, once you solve that issue, the stronger the connectivity is going to be, meaning that's when you said earlier, like the longer the slump, when you get out of it, you're going to be a lot better, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Absolutely. So you strengthen that connection to where it becomes, again, it's fast, which means it can happen much more on the subconscious level.
Yes. To where autonomous, right? Like it's just like I'm doing it without thinking. Mm-hmm. And I probably use this too much on the podcast, but one of the things that really hit me is when they're training boxers, they say a thinking mind is a slow mind. And they want their boxers reacting the whole time and working off what they would call it muscle memory. And I would probably tell this conversation, but that was kind of the thing. It was pretty easy to punch a guy that's thinking. Yeah. And I kind of looked at it the same way roping, right?
Yeah. It is. And I don't know how much we need to go into this, but they tend to call it either system 1 or system 2 whenever you're looking at the brain, or fast versus slow thinking. Psychologist wrote many books and publications, Daniel Kahneman. He always called it fast and slow thinking, and it's that the fast thinking is that automated subconscious brain. The slow thinking is the conscious brain that's trying to figure things out. The differences between those two is the subconscious is much more likely to make errors. So it will jump to conclusions before it should jump to conclusions in many cases, but it's very, very fast. The slow brain will get it much more accurate, but it's slow. And the learning is that I want to pull things up to the slow brain. So that way I have to think about it. That's the point is I'm here, I'm thinking about it. This is what I need to fix in my swing. This is the way I need to deliver my loop. This is where my horse needs to be. This is where my left hand needs to be, right? Very, very cognitive and hard to do because if you're thinking about all of those things, that the brain consumes about 20% of the body's energy. So that's hard. But yeah, that part figures it out, right? You get that firing. Hey, I got it. I can do it. I figured it out. But then it's repetition, and then it's associating that, and you still make some mistakes, but the mistakes are fewer. You're starting to get this internal feel, right? So I don't necessarily have to. I'm a big fan of external feedback, and I was born in the 1900s, right? So we used to look at the reflection of ourselves in the barn window.
Yeah.
I think more people need to get a mirror installed. Video is great, but if you can see yourself as you're doing the thing, then it's much easier to change things, right? I get immediate feedback.
Gotcha, because you can be swinging your rope, for example, and you know how you want it to swing, you know how you want it to look, and you can be swinging, looking at your swing, and then change it and actually see as you're doing it, as opposed to a video where you got a video each time, go back and forth. That makes a lot of sense.
If you can reduce the amount of time between error, feedback, and correction, then you can substantially increase learning speed.
Wow.
But anyways, right, so you get the external feedback in the cognitive phase, and then you start to identify it internally. I know how this feels. That's the associative phase. And then, like you said, autonomous. Now that sequence of neurons just fires. And good or bad, that's the way it's going to fire. And that, too, with the muscle memory, that's one of the, again, I get the point of muscle memory. I don't think it's wrong to use that. I just try to highlight the mental part of that. It is very important. Because if you're mindlessly repeating something, that creates the stage for bad habits. Because you don't know, right? You're thinking about, like whatever, I wonder, who's posting on Instagram, or did I pick my kids up? I mean, whatever the case may be. And then all of a sudden, you're going to start firing some other sequence of neurons and bad habits will start to set in. So that's why 100% focused.
So let's go to that. Because I kind of stopped you right at 20 hours of real deliberate focus, roping in the dummy. You can show substantial improvement. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what does real deliberate practice mean? Because the first thing I want to kind of point out is when we say 20 hours of practice, well, roping the dummy, I've got a few ways that I've done it, but 20 hours of practice on a horse, like roping, is a couple of days because you're not getting that many runs in no matter what. But roping the dummy, it seems like there's a lot of reps involved and everything can kind of stay locked in a little bit more. So we agree on that, right? As far as, okay. Yeah. So let's talk about specifically just roping the dummy where you can rep it out a lot and get a lot of loops in.
Yeah, I frequently go back to this focused attention because I think that's the missing key. That's the missing piece in most people's practice, especially on a dummy, because it's so easy to think about other things, and it's very important to remove distractors. So things like music. I don't listen to a lot of music, but I like some songs. If you find yourself singing along with the song, more so than paying attention to the dummy, then you need to cut the music. If you're roping with a friend and you're talking more about something else than specific goals of roping the dummy, then you need to not rope the dummy with that friend. If you have this big thing with social media, and I think sometimes it shows my age, but one of the worst, think about when you're working on something. We talked about the neurons, right? The cells in the brain. You've given them a task. And they're trying to figure things out, right? They want to figure it out, and they're gonna fire, right? They're gonna bounce around. All this stuff's going on. If you look at something that is very content rich, all of a sudden, like videos, right? If you start scrolling through videos, not roping videos, because I think that should be purposeful. But if you're scrolling through random...
There's nothing wrong with roping videos on xfactorroping.com for sure.
If you're scrolling through, random things on social media, all of a sudden, all these excited neurons that are trying to figure out how to stop splitting the horns are now distracted by this content-rich media.
Okay.
And huge distractor because you've taken something you're focused on and completely redirected.
And let out outside influence in because you don't even know it's coming through the feed or
Yeah,
where your mind's going
yeah,
to go, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And visual input has such a huge impact on our brain, right? So the eyeballs are really the extension of the nervous system. So it feeds right into the brain, right? So a huge amount of input. So the things you see within a practice session matter. There is some pretty good. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a graduate student at MIT, and they would do these really detailed working sessions where they would whiteboarding sessions. They would call them 3 to 4 hours of trying to figure out problems. He was in mathematics, so something to do with mathematics. And what they found is after those whiteboarding sessions, if they would go out into nature, and he called it the nonlinear patterns of nature, what was basically like a recovery session for the brain. So you go out and you watch the way trees blow, the way the river flows. Like if you expose yourself to that, then it creates this environment for those brain cells to flourish a little bit more.
Kind of like a meditative state,
Yes,
essentially.
absolutely.
Gotcha.
But then the linear patterns within things that are less natural, right? The roads, the cars, like those types of things, it kind of deters that. And so that's a big thing with social media too. Is like it's gonna completely put those neurons on a different path. So I think that's a big part of it. Get rid of social media during the practice session.
Okay. So right quick, I kind of want to tie this, or just ask you. I mean, so a lot of like, I've got kind of two things I've worked on really hard for the last 10 years, right? Is my roping and this business. And it seems like I'm kind of constantly grinding it out between both at times, right? But a lot of the best ideas or aha moments come when I'm like mowing the lawn. And it's like I'm doing something, and I kind of found a rhythm. Like it's like cleaning stalls, mowing the lawn, sometimes lifting weights. If I like really I notice if I'm lifting weights, I kind of got to get out of breath. I've kind of got to be out of breath for a while where I can only think about breathing. That's kind of the sweet spot for me. But then something will just click, and and it just like pops into my brain. Like, why don't you put it together like this? And it's happened with my roping a lot. And then I'll like go try it, and it seems like more often than not, it has been the solution to what I was looking for. So it's probably pretty similar. Like, I don't know what that's called exactly. Like it's some probably sort of meditative state when you're just mowing the lawn, going back and forth, really not thinking about anything, and just getting your mind calm, right?
Yeah.
I guess.
What happens is you have to get that thinking brain. You oftentimes have to get that part of that out of the way,
Gotcha.
so that way everything else can
That makes sense. That's exactly
can do
what
its
it is.
thing.
Yeah.
The I can't remember the name of the book, old book. But anyway, I'll probably remember it at some point when I stop thinking about it. Right?
Is it cyber?
The Yes,
Yeah.
psycho-cybernetics.
Yeah. Cyber.
Yes. Yeah. So that guy, and I don't know if you know that story, very interesting story, but he said the brain is teleological target seeking. You give it a task, you give it a goal, it'll figure it out. It'll figure out how to get there, no matter what it is. So I firmly believe that, right? If you have something in the forefront of your thought, like I need to do this, the brain will continue to work in the background to figure out a solution. Now, what happens is you're aware of like a subliminal, right? Subliminal messages, a subliminal state.
Yeah. Maybe. Explain it to me.
A liminal state is essentially this level of consciousness.
Okay.
So all of us here, we're above that right now, right? We're above just a basic level of consciousness, or being conscious, because we're engaged in this type of stuff. If you can get your body in the right type of environment, you can reach down towards that liminal state and below that into a subliminal state, and it generally occurs where temperature can matter, right? If you get into a temperature that's a little bit closer to your body temperature, if the lights are down a little bit, right? So it's a little bit not necessarily like sleep, but not bright fluorescent lights, right? So if you kind of change some of those things right there, you kind of just like lower some of the activity in parts of the brain to where you can start to make these connections better. A lot of times it happens to people when they're trying to fall asleep. They're very, very comfortable, right? So they've kind of lost sensation, physical sensation of their body, right? They're just laying there. The lights are off. The temperature is a little bit cooler or whatever. And a lot of times that's where people have these kind of epiphanies or these
I've
awakenings.
had them. I've talked to people that have had them. Like they essentially say they like dreamed it.
Yes.
Yeah.
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 Um, uh, Thomas Edison, I believe, he had something called a sleeping chair. And so he would, or maybe call it his thinking chair, but he would hold steel balls in his hand and he would lay there. And the idea of the steel balls is whenever he would fall asleep, he would drop those balls. But what he said is that it was in between sleep and wakefulness, where for just a moment, your the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex turns off, and that allows these other parts of the brain to make these connections. All
Gotcha.
too often, this more evolved part of our brain, it relates things to reality, right? Like, I can't do that. It's not realistic, right? I got a family, I've got bills, right? But as soon as this turns off, the rest of the brain can come up with these wild ideas. That's why dreams can be so crazy, because the frontal lobe goes to sleep and it's not telling the rest of the brain, like, that doesn't make any sense. You shouldn't go to school with just your underwear on. You shouldn't, that's because this part's turned off. So it has a lot to do with that. You calm down activity right here, and the rest of it can kind of make some of these connections that otherwise were being deterred because of this more practical part of our brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so getting back to this deliberate practice, we're roping the dummy. We've agreed that all we're doing mentally is focused on roping the dummy. If you can listen to music, you can listen to music, fine. But your focus, honestly, you probably shouldn't be hearing the music much when you're doing it. Like, you're so focused, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's just literally background noise, but you're not. It's not doing a lot for you, like stimulation wise.
Yeah.
So 20 hours of that focus. Is there anything like, what does that need to look like? And
So we probably, unless you want to circle back to it later, spend a little bit more time on purposeful practice.
Okay, yep.
So then we can better understand
no problem.
deliberate practice.
I love going bouncing around. So
So purpose. Well, in deliberate practice, the best way to describe it is guided purposeful practice. So that's why I think this purposeful practice needs a little bit more time. So we said a purposeful practice is going to be characterized or really defined by goals. So you need to have clear and distinct goals. The goal setting process can be any variety of things. We can maybe talk about that more specifically later. But the biggest error I see with goal setting is people don't know the difference between outcome goals and process goals. An outcome goal is an outcome goal. Like what was your performance? We
I want to
generally
win a roping, right?
say it again.
I want to win something at a roping, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't ever make winning an outcome because we can't control winning.
Right.
It's not determined by us; it's predetermined. Focus on what you can control. The serenity prayer: control the controllable. So your outcome goal needs to be based on your performance, and it's something like, at these next 5 jackpots, I'm going to rope 80% of my steers or 100% of my steers the first half of the arena. That's an outcome goal. Then you identify why you're not doing that. Like, what happened for you to not reach that outcome goal? And that's how you build your process goals. So, I missed these steers because I split the horns, I waved it off, whatever. And then you dig into that. And that's what I take to the practice pen is I got to figure that piece out. A lot of times in sports psychology, and I'm not a sports psychologist, but I did a postgraduate certification on it. There's this idea of getting rid of the negative, right? Like, oh, you made a mistake, erase it from your memory. And I understand that to a point, but we also have to take that, kind of like you said earlier, where, well, I got to figure out why I did that, right? If that's what caused me to not reach this outcome goal, I got to figure that piece out. So I need to dig into the failures a little bit to determine my process goals. And that process goal would be whatever, right? Covering the horns better, smoother delivery, like whatever the case might be, different angle on the swing. And then that's what you take to the practice pen. That's the process goal. That's what I'm going to focus on. And like you said earlier too, like that means you might not catch anything, and that's okay. it might mean that your partner doesn't get any practice, and then you have to have a backup plan for that, like somebody's sitting on the four-wheeler ready to go or whatever the case might be. But anyway, so that's, you identify that process goal that gets 100% of your focus during the practice. In that same note, I would encourage people just to start off, take that practice goal to the dummy, then to the sled, and maybe you don't even rope steers for the next, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, whatever the case is. You just hone in on that in a much more controlled environment so you can focus on it and you get that consistent practice. So that's a big piece of it. And then the other big part of that is the self-monitoring. So in order to be able to self-monitor, I have to have very clear mental representations. So mental representation is we talked about it a little bit earlier, but it is a combination of procedural knowledge and contextual knowledge. Procedural knowledge is the procedure. I know how to swing. I know how to deliver. I know where my left hand is supposed to be. I know the procedure in order to make this happen the right way. And then contextual knowledge is understanding the rules of the game, understanding the behavior of animals, understanding any variety of things that are related to the context. Those two combined is what makes a very clear mental representation. That's also the feel that you talk about. Whenever they've done some, or a good example of this, they would do studies with soccer players, and they would take a video and they would stop it, right? And they would show different levels of players, the screen, for like less than a second. And the more experienced the player can look at that screen very briefly and with a high degree of accuracy know the next move. So they'll say like, he's going to pass it. He's going to pass it to number 8. He's going to shoot it, like whatever, and they would be right. The less experienced, they wouldn't know. And that is that contextual knowledge. The more experience, he's able to quickly recognize where players are out on the field, where the play is taking place, and what needs to happen next. Interesting piece of that is you ask that guy or girl, how did you know that? I don't know. Just intuition, I guess. So they call that feel. And it's the same thing with roping, right? The more time you spend understanding not only the procedure, but studying the sport. If you want to know cows, be around cows. If you want to know horses, be around horses. All of that goes into building that robust mental representation. That's your intuition or your feel. And that's how you self-monitor. So I know so much about the sport that I know if my loop hits a certain way, I know what's wrong. That's my feedback. I know, I know this, so then I can go back and I can fix it with my dummy roping or whatever's happening. So those are two of the big things there with that purposeful practice, the goal setting, and then having a clear enough mental representation of how things should be, so that way I get that feedback and I know what to do with it.
Okay.
And then taking that to deliberate practice. Deliberate practice is best defined as guided, purposeful practice. So these two go hand in hand, very close together. Essentially, with deliberate practice or what separates deliberate practice is you have a coach that has enough expertise in the field to know where you are currently and what needs to happen next. And what they do is they tell you, okay, this is what you need to work on. And then you go back to purposeful practice and you take that. So it is that coach guided to where, coach told me this is what I'm working on this week. I go back, I see him again next week. And then he or she knows, like, okay, that was a little too much. So they know how to dial it back. So they know how to push you towards the edge of your comfort zone, push you out of your comfort zone, and they know how and when to pull you back if they need to. So the big piece of that is finding that coach and having somebody that can provide that guidance, but you still have to take that back to the purposeful practice and work on it there.
Okay, so finding a coach, that seems like that's going to be a pretty big challenge, right? Because I think there's a lot of just a lot of knowledge out there, right? But I think you get a lot of times there's teachers, and then there's people that they're not necessarily teachers,
Yes.
right? And they might give you one of my biggest red flags is this is what I've been working on. Like, if anyone would tell me that, I just kind of tuned them out. Because I was just well, it's not to me. This isn't like what you're seeing with me. It might be relatable at some point, but it is a big red flag for me. So I always kind of tried to look at that, and I had a guy later on the last few years that I roped with a lot was Marty Becker, and he ended up being that for me. And the experiences that I got were he we always practiced like for what I needed, for what the horses needed, and it was just like you just built on it the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Where in the past it was like I'd get a lesson and then they would mess my roping up and I would have to figure it out for as long as it took. But this was like it kind of had a more of like a building block feel. Like we took steps back, but not like drastic breakdowns.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of like one of my concerns as far as like having someone help me out with my roping after that, or being like who I ask. So if you're looking for a coach, like what is some advice you see? And because I think that it can kind of go bad, and it can, but it also is it's kind of the way too, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very vital to
Mm-hmm.
being successful.
It is. It's a huge piece of it, and especially to back with that purposeful practice thing. I talk about the feedback, the self monitoring, the mental representation. That takes time, and if you don't have that skill yet to be able to self monitor, you got to have a coach, or you're just going to become very stagnant. You just don't know, right? There's going to be a lot of time. I don't know what I'm doing.
Got to have someone to push you.
Yeah. So finding that coach, more people should do that. The most important thing with finding a coach is track record, and I sometimes hesitate to say this, but I'm going to say it. It's not number of world championships. It's track record. Like how many people have they worked with and how are they doing, right? And you can see that sometimes. A good coach knows how to connect. A good coach does not necessarily have to be, they have to be an expert in the field to the point that they know the next step for you, but they don't necessarily have to be the best in the world, right? They just know, like if you're a 3, find a 5. And a 5 is like, I remember being a 3. And they can at least provide some guidance. Now, I wouldn't necessarily pay that person. I wouldn't really establish a coaching client relationship necessarily, but it's somebody. It's somebody that was where you were, and they know like this
Gotcha.
might be what you need to do. In some of my experiences, I really think with the videos and stuff I've watched, Ricky Green to me appears to be the gold standard of coaches. He connected the way he taught, how he taught. It seemed to be excellent. Although I never met him in person, I watched a lot of his content. I've worked a lot with, fortunate enough to be pretty good buddies with Joel Bach, and so I've roped with him quite a bit. And he's one of those guys too. Like he has this unique ability to connect with people where they are and work with them to find the best strategy. So, my personal experience, he's excellent. Speed Williams, number of world championships, but he also appears to have a pretty good track record because he's at least on track to have trained 2 future world champions from the ground up. And I think some of the best of the world still go and work with him. Some of the stuff I've seen on the content, it looks like he has a series of steps that are built out for any level. So I'd love to go sign up for one of his classes sometime to just get that experience. But that's really what I would look at is try to find a track record, right? Who have you worked with? How are they doing? If you reach out to any of these people, you should ask for a list of references, and they should provide it. And you call them up, like, how was the training? How did it go? How was this? How was that? That should be just like a normal piece of trying to go to a roping school, is talking to people they've worked with before. So I think that's a really important piece, and it takes some exploration out there, and just really seeing what they're doing, going to different people. I think roping schools actually should cost more than they do, but because you could sign up for a few $100 and then just go see what your experience is like. If it's not the best experience, then go work with somebody else. You'll pretty much always pick up something from somebody. If you're paying attention, even just watching. We have these mirror neurons, and so if you can just sit and watch somebody else do something, even if they're not the best coach, you can still pick something up from that. In baseball, what we see is, youth baseball is huge. Like that was a surprise to me. But you'll get a team that hires a former, major leaguer, and everybody rushes. They want to go play for this guy. Well, it turns out he was a good player. He's not a good coach.
Right.
A lot of times they just don't know how to verbalize certain things, and that takes coaching experience.
What do you think about finding your comfort zone, like understanding where that's at, and like as you reevaluate it, because I think that's one of the things is like as you probably get to these processes, right? You have a coach, and it does. I think once you've kind of got out of the naive stage, the comfort zone is probably really easy to fall into, like constantly.
Mhm.
So, how do you try to identify or be mindful of not falling into your comfort zone? And then, is there a way to go too far out of your comfort zone and try to overdo it, really?
Good question. The I think it's easy to identify a comfort zone if we go back to the naive practice. If you finish up a practice session, or if you reflect on your practices for the week and you think, "Man, I had a lot of fun this week," that's a pretty good sign that maybe you're too much in that comfort zone.
If you're having too much fun, you're in your comfort zone.
But if you
Oh
think
no.
about that, like yeah, a lot of fun, man, I feel great.
Yeah.
Probably need to push yourself a little bit. And again, if you think about it with working out or resistance training, you're sore afterwards, right? Like it doesn't feel great. The muscles are adapting. The brain doesn't necessarily get sore, but it's kind of that same thing. Like after a practice session, you think, man, that was a lot of work. Whatever happened out there, like it was effortful. I had to work at it. I feel that way a lot of times after jackpots with like stronger steers or something. Like at the end of it, it's like, whew, that was a tough day.
Yeah.
Regardless of how you did, it was just work. That's the way practice sessions should feel. You should, in a practice session, there should be about a 30% error rate, 30 to 40% error rate. So if you
Okay.
run 10 steers, you should miss 3 or 4. If you don't, then you're not pushing yourself too far. If you rope all 10, then you haven't pushed yourself far enough. So I think that's a pretty good gauge is
Okay.
is looking at that.
That's about where I was at. I kind of
Yeah,
was like, I thought my best practices were I missed 3 out of 10.
yeah.
Like it just I stayed. I didn't have any major lapses afterwards in the
Yeah.
next practice session. So okay, that makes sense to me.
Pushing yourself too far really just comes down to personal resilience. Can you go out there and have a practice session where you miss all 10 and you're able to keep going? And tomorrow you do the same, and tomorrow you
Right.
do the same. Now, it could be a sign that you're stretching way too far. But hey, if you set a stretch goal like that and you're going to stick with it, I don't think I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. It's just a big hit on your confidence. So that would be the thing. Like,
Okay.
can you stay motivated if you have a 0% catch rate? Can you stay motivated to stick through it?
Well, and I think that's really important to match that up with goals. So, for example, if you're a 3 header and you are like, I'm going to start throwing 2 and 3 coils and you're missing every steer, well, you're probably going to overcook the bacon here because even if you get to a stage where you start catching them there, you skipped all the other
Yeah, yeah,
steps of where to ride to and how to win at a jackpot. And so I think like looking at the analyzing performance and like what it takes to win and then having the goal setting being a little bit built for that can kind of help you like, all right, this is what I think it takes to win at this level.
mhm,
And this is where I want to go. And this is the shots I need. And so then once you get that down, then you do it again. What does it take to win at this level? The next step. And I think that's how you kind of methodically work through
mhm.
with goal setting and constantly staying out of your comfort
Yeah,
zone, right?
yeah. Joel always says the most important shot is the layup. If you can't go out there and make the layup, then that's what you need to be working on.
Yeah.
And a lot of that too, it goes back to fundamentals, and I think this is important with finding a coach, hiring coaches. If you're just getting started, go get a coach. Figure out those fundamentals, because if you don't get the right type of a foundational swing, you're not going to be able to build off that. How many times do you see people that they kind of have a strange looking swing, but they can kick to the hip and they can rope everything, but then and they go to the jackpot and they do well, right? But then, well, they get raised, and well, you got to start reaching a coil, but you can't with that swing. So then you got to go back, or you just kind of stay where you are. Or if you really want to change, we got to go back and change all the fundamentals.
Yeah.
A really interesting book that I can't remember the name of, but I can find all this stuff at home. It was about a ping pong player, table tennis player. He was, I think he eventually became a world champion, but he was a U.S. champion, and then he went to compete on the world stage. And he was no match for either the Chinese or the Japanese. And what he found is, well, their fundamentals are different. They have a different body position. They have a different way that they hold their paddle. Right, everything's different. So he had to go back and spend, I think it was 8, 9, 10 months, maybe even a year, just sort of redoing his body position and how he held his paddle. And so that would be the things. Well, ideally, you want to avoid that. You want to avoid having to take a year off to redo your swing. So start from the beginning. Like figure that out. Right? Get a good swing, a good swing that you can build from, and then you can work through those steps, just like you said.
Yeah, really focusing on fundamentals through this and then building off of fundamentals. Yeah. So kind of like that, the mirror and being able to define what a good swing is. There's a lot of good resources and content out there, like what we think makes a good swing. I think there's a lot of places you can find that, right? So really try to decide like, hey, because I think one thing about roping that is different than a lot of sports is everyone's swing is going to be a little bit different. There are some key principles to each swing, but just understanding that no one really swings the rope. Like very few people swing it the exact same way.
Yeah.
Usually they're related.
Yeah.
So I think that's something I would just really pay attention to and dive into is like, what are the fundamentals?
Yeah, for sure. And I would encourage people to find a swing, go through the videos, find a swing that you like. Like I always like Clay Tryon's swing, and I'm sure I don't swing anything like his, but I always liked it.
It's a good swing.
And you watch the video, right? You get yourself an iPad or whatever, you watch the video, and then you swing a couple times. Don't rope the dummy, just swing. Watch the video, swing in the mirror, looking at the mirror, and you just repeat that. Like we talked about the other day, the Zen and the art of archery, right? They practice pulling the bow back for like a year. It's tough to know the timeline in that book, but it really is. They pull the bow back for a year. It's perfecting just drawing the bow tight. So you take some time to perfect this swing, and then it makes everything else just you can build off of it, right? And you can expand and get better over time. But yeah, videos, mirror, like you just work back and forth, and you try to mimic whatever you want to see. We're very good at mimicking things. So if you watch it and practice, you can do that.
So right with this, I think on the other side of, obviously we're finding, like what I'm hearing a lot is improvement is basically you're staying out of your comfort zone constantly. And it's just trying to find the lines of being out of your comfort zone that works the best for you. So ideally your 60 to 80% catch ratio, right around 70 to 80 is probably ideal for most people, I think, to kind of keep competing. So there's kind of two things. First, what I'll go with is overtraining and burnout. How do you avoid overtraining, too much practice, burnout? Because this is one thing about this. It sounds like a lot of practice isn't going to be very fun, right? And it sounds like I might be going through a lot of healers too, because they're not going to get to throw their rope a lot at my house.
That's true. You always have to have a backup plan for that. I don't know that we can overtrain. Of course, when I think of overtraining, my mind comes to injury, right? Repetitive strain injury. Yes, that kind of stuff can happen. Too much swinging a rope, people's posture, like all this type of stuff. Maybe there starts to be some aches and pains. But as far as the brain is concerned, and really trying to boost performance, sleep is a very important thing. So again, if you go back and you look at the practice habits and behaviors of some of the best in the world, they sleep a lot. Roger Federer is reported to sleep 12 hours a day, tennis player. You even get some of these musicians, top of the world musicians, where they're getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep at night and they're taking a nap in the afternoon. And that's because it takes a lot of energy for the brain to stay focused and to do those things. So I think that's a really big part. Is that, making sure you're maximizing the sleep time so that way you can maximize your concentration time. The knowing when to take breaks for sure. It's a big piece of this is, whenever you're roping the dummy, if you're all in, you mentioned Huberman earlier, and he has he does a podcast where he talks about how to increase attention and focus. But if you follow any of the things he talks about there and you're all in, like maybe 20 minutes of roping the dummy and then take a break. Right, give yourself a bit of a recovery. Get a drink, whatever you need to do. Dividing it up. Al Bach, way back in the day, he used to talk about throwing 20 loops before breakfast, 20 loops at lunchtime, 20 loops after dinner. And if you kind of divide things up like that, I think that's a good way to at least try to stay focused in those practice sessions, and maybe kind of avoid the sensation of just feeling wore out. But being tired is part of it. You should feel like you put some effort in
Yeah.
after roping the dummy.
I so often rodeo and you're exhausted.
Yeah.
And it's like you go to a perf at night, probably got to drive somewhere, or even you just go to bed late. And then if there's slacks in the morning, those are usually the hardest runs. Like I felt like those were the biggest struggle for me.
Mhm.
And so one of the things I started doing was I started practicing early. And I started trying to find
Did you say earlier?
yes, in the
Okay.
mornings.
Mhm.
I tried to rope when I was really tired. And I felt that it was really hard to get like focused. Like you kind of had to have like a little bit of a routine to kind of get everything up because one, when you're rodeoing, you're trying to get as much sleep as you can. And so you're generally waking up is whatever time you need to be prepared. But I kept finding it like I needed a couple hours probably to kind of get ready to go.
Mhm.
But it meant like a lot of my practice, I was tired. And I tried to actually embrace some of those situations. And then other things like I tried to embrace, like if it was cold, if it was windy, I roped in it because I figured it would arise sometime and I wanted to be ready for it. And so I think there's like this set of like mental toughness, but also it probably does lead to a little like more of a burnout as you do get tired because you just kind of need rest, right? And it's really hard to I don't know, but I also see guys that they don't sleep very
Yeah.
much. Like and in the horse like world, it just seems like they can go without sleep. So I that one's hard for me to understand because I'm watching other guys that are competing at a real high level and I feel like they've just trained themselves to like 4 or 5 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, and they seem to be top tier performers after they do it for a long period of time. So I'm kind of curious what you think on that.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, yes, they're performing very, very well under those conditions, but are they improving? Are they improving? Or are they performing at a level
Gotcha.
that they've already mastered? And this is. Have you ever heard of the 10,000 hour rule?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, and do you understand that it's a myth? Like, have you ever heard that it's a myth?
Well, I believed it till maybe this morning. So let's talk about the 10,000 hour rule because I think the basis of it is it takes 10,000 hours of doing something to achieve mastery.
Yeah.
Like to sum it up, right?
Yeah, and so that phrase was coined by Malcolm Gladwell in a book called Outliers. Wonderful author. He writes very intriguing books, but he oftentimes overemphasizes things to make a good story, and he does it well, and it's worked out for him. That's one of the things that he's overemphasized. So that the 10,000 hours, it was based off of research done on musicians by Anders Ericsson, and what he and his team of researchers did is they looked at what was the hours of deliberate practice, not deliberate, that solitary practice, that solitary focused practice. By the time these musicians were, I think it was 18 and 20. Maybe they even did another one at 23. But the better, so the best in the field, I would say that they researched at 20 years old, they had averaged about 10,000 hours of focused solitary practice. However, that's an average. That was an average of 100 different musicians. Some of them practiced up to 18,000 hours. Some of them practiced as little as 4,000. So really, very few people actually practice 10,000 hours. Some practice more. Some practice
It's just kind of the average, like
less.
a rule of thumb. It takes 10,000 hours.
Yeah, but it's an arbitrary number of at 20 years old. Why didn't he use the number 7,400 at 18 years old? Like, well, it didn't sound as good. So the 10,000 hours is not necessarily the case. However, the evidence is pretty good that 10 years 10 years sort of encapsulates this maturity period within the industry and doing the thing to really move somebody up into an expert level of performance. So number of hours within that 10 years is less important, but it's 10 years of very hard work. And so that's what I would say whenever you look at a lot of the guys out there doing this, how many years has this been their life? How many years have they worked at this incredibly hard? So what I would say is, if they could get sleep, who knows how good they could be? Like, who knows how good they could perform if they were running on a full battery? but the nature of the sport, you just can't.
Yeah. Okay. No, I mean, makes sense, and it's that I think that's kind of the thing because the amount of work that you have to do to kind of make a living while you're doing it
Mm-hmm.
too, it's kind of like that requires a lot out of it. So, kind of going back to burnout,
Mm-hmm.
where does that come from? Like burnout. We kind of talked about overtraining. Like you don't think we can really overtrain. Like obviously there's, but I think there's times where like for me it's absolute meltdown,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like I have blowups, and I've had them for years, and I'll still have them. Like I'll have them with golf, like when I'm working at it, and I'll still have them. Like I haven't competed a lot rodeoing here lately, but I'll still have a day every once in a while where I'll lose it pretty good. And I some days I handle it well. Some days I'm not too proud of myself. It's a concern of mine. It really is. But what do you think about that as far as like the kind of the burning out or just kind of reaching your limit there with practice?
So burnout can happen for a couple of reasons. Of course, there can be something that is related to resources or financial. Right? You reach a point where you can't do it anymore for whatever reason. It's expensive. When we talk about burnout more on a psychological level, I think it has a lot more to do with unmet expectations. Like I thought I would be here by this time. I thought I would be this good, and I'm not. And like that's tough. It's tough to handle that. It's tough to deal with that. And the continual unmet expectations really beats us down emotionally, psychologically, and I think that's where a lot of burnout comes from. So I think it's important, and we didn't really go into a ton of details about how to set goals, but when you set goals, just like everything else, it should be work, right? You sit down with yourself, perhaps your family, and it takes time to work through these goals. It's a you don't pull up to the arena and think, okay, today I'm going to work on whatever. That's not how it works. To really set meaningful goals, you do that. You sit down. I use SMART, SMART, for a goal setting framework. But the different steps of that is you're working through it. Now, what hurdles am I going to face here? How am I going to work through that hurdle? How do I measure this objectively? And whenever you do that, you get much more realistic expectations, and that will reduce some of that burnout. In younger athletes, most of the burnout is related to, let me say not most, a lot of the burnout is related to unmet parent expectations. Like my mom or dad want me to do this, and I don't really want to anymore. But so that leads to a lot of burnout in younger athletes.
Okay. So we got goal setting. If we're not meeting our own expectations, what are some solutions outside of the goal setting? Is it kind of, I think a lot of people tie it to their self-worth,
Mhm.
and that kind of happens, or what are some ways outside of the goal setting, or is it just through goal setting that you think that you can kind of help avoid that? Or
I think goal setting is a big part of it. To go through the SMART really quickly, have you ever heard of that? The SMART goals.
I've heard of it, but I
Okay.
couldn't like repeat it, so go ahead.
All right. So the S is specific. Your goals need to be very specific. Using something like catch percentage, right? Well, that's very specific. You know how many you caught. You know how many you missed. Like there's no question. Very objective. Measurable. You should have not yes, this is measurable, but how exactly are you going to measure this goal? Is it through catch percentage? Is it through practice? Is it through right? And the point of that, right, is you're sitting down with pen and paper and you're working through this. This is my goal. This is how specific it is. This is how I'm going to measure it. The A is attainable, and attainable can sometimes be tough because it's related. It needs to be related to like time. So I think as a Christian, I believe in very, very unrealistic things. Sometimes you hear people say that the goal needs to be realistic. Well, as a Christian, right, to believe in something that seems impossible means you believe anything is possible. So I do think you can set very lofty goals, and they're attainable within specific parameters. So A, is the goal attainable based on the amount of time you have to work? Is the goal attainable based on your financial resources? Is the goal attainable based on your family's expectations? And again, that it takes work because you're considering all those things. Like, okay, is this something my family's willing to sacrifice in order for me to do this? The R means relevant, so SMAR. Relevant should be related to, again, right, more work. Everybody's going to have to do so much work. You need to identify your purpose. And I don't encourage people to try to identify or seek passions, because I think passions are fleeting. It's hard to catch passions. They tend to be more superficial. But purpose. What is your underlying purpose? And a good way to do this, or an example that's used quite a bit, is like the retirement dinner. So if you were, imagine you're going to your retirement dinner, what would you want people to say about you? Sometimes, perhaps a bit darker, is if somebody's giving you a eulogy, what would they want? What would you want them to say? And when you identify your purpose, the goals must align with that purpose, whatever it is. If it's spiritual in nature, Alan Bach was very open about himself using the arena and roping to bring more people to Christ, right? So he had a very important purpose. Again, if we go to burnout and expectations, oh, wait a minute, I'm trying to fulfill this purpose here. That is spiritual, it's beyond me, it's whatever. And that's going to really alter the expectations and that burnout, because there's something bigger happening here. Like, it's okay that I didn't win. It's okay that I had a little blow up. That's okay, because I have something else that I'm working on. This is leading me towards something that's much more purposeful. And then the last one is T. So time frame, time bound, timely. You can set 10-year goals, 5-year goals, 1-year goals, whatever the case may be. Any fellow procrastinators also know that, like, a due date means I better get to work. So that's the SMART. And again, if you take the time to work through that, then you have a set of goals that aren't necessarily leading to false expectations, and don't really lead to as much burnout, because it's, this is what we're working on as a family. These are the hurdles that I'm expecting that I might face. This is how I'm going to overcome them. And again, I'm working towards this bigger purpose within this specific time. So I really think goal setting is the answer if you take the time to do it correctly.
And do you think that kind of takes out positive and negative feedback? Is that why? Essentially, like, so we talked about you're not fulfilling what you should in your mind be doing. So if you kind of are giving yourself lots of negative feedback, that's probably keeps kind of knocking away at that. And then you might be just a little bit too reliant on positive feedback, where it's more like, we get back to goals. This is kind of the process. This is what we're working on. Here's like, it's more of just a numbers game. And then you just kind of like got to figure out, like, well, this is what we need to this is what I need to be able to accomplish. Here's what I need to work at. This is how long I think it should take. If it takes longer, you just adjust from there. Okay, it's obviously not going as fast, and then it's less like you're not fulfilling like your self-worth or whatever you want to call that, right?
Yeah, it is. And positive and negative feedback, that could get into a whole lot of stuff on a psychological level. So what I would say about that is try to the goal setting should help with that, yes, because there's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days, and those are just days. Even a bad day, like we talked about with the slumps or whatever, that should be framed in a positive light. Like, hey, I missed everything today. Now I've got some stuff to work on. Let's get to work. Let's get back at it.
Right.
But then there's a whole piece of it too, is mindfulness. I don't know if you talk much about mindfulness or if you've read much about it, but one of the things of mindfulness is you view things from an objective perspective. So it's not a good day or a bad day. It's just a day. And again, depending on a spiritual thing. If you're, let the Lord's will be done. Whatever happens today is what's supposed to happen. It's not up to me if this goes the way I think it should go, or if it doesn't. But whenever you do that type of stuff, you're kind of like removing positivity and negativity from the whole conversation. It's not a good day. It's not a bad day. It's just a day. It's a step in the right direction because I know I'm working on the things I need to, and I don't necessarily know what the end result is. But I'm going to keep working on this goal with this purpose, with my family, my friends, whoever, and that's what we're going to do. And things will line up.
Yeah, some of my favorite books are Ryan Holiday's books about Stoicism. Like those ones have just they really hit home for some reason, just mainly because of that. Okay, so we're going back to our 20 hours of deliberate practice on the dummy. I do have a couple of things with this. Like we're talking about our senses and our eyes and being focused, right? One thing that's kind of like it hit me. I feel like I've ran a lot of steers. There's definitely a lot of people that have roped more than I have, but I do remember one day specifically, I was getting my head rope off, and my buddy was roping, and I didn't see it, and the steer kind of comes in behind, and he's like, "Did you see that?" And I just remember listening to the run, and I was like, "You split the horns," and I could tell him that I could just what his head loop did just from how it sounded. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that I can do that every time. I can do it a lot heading though. Like I know what a head loop should sound like. And so like with this focus, how much of our senses, because for me it seems like a lot of audio. Like I mean, I don't know. It's just something I picked up over the last 4 or 5 years. But how much of our senses should be involved with this focus, and what does our focus practice on the dummy for these 20 hours to really like say we can gain a lot of ground, if you will, and a lot of improvement.
I really like that you mentioned that about the senses and the sound. I think that's a big piece of it. It's a big piece of developing that mental representation like we talked about is you know the way a crisp head loop sounds. You should, right? If you're roping the Smarty or the Rope Smart or whatever, and it's slapping on plastic, well, that doesn't sound like it's supposed to, right?
That's why I don't rope them. I don't like the way it sounds.
But that's a part of it.
Yeah.
Is you whenever you're roping out, obviously you can see it, right? A ton of visual information. You can hear it. I can combine that. Like, oh, that one looked really good. It sounded much more smooth. So those two are huge pieces of it, and I think they should be that should be a part of it.
And just part of your feedback, right?
Yeah.
Like okay, this is good. Okay, maybe it sounded like because I kind of know especially one coil, like the 10,000 kicks. That's my one coil shot.
Yeah.
So I know what it sounds like and the pop that it's supposed to make. And it does it on steers too. That's why we do stuff with dummy companies at times, but like horns, that's why I rope them that sound as close to real horns as I can because of that. Like I feel like they're the right size and I get the right feel when I pull my slack plus feedback. So I think that subconsciously, I don't even know that probably till this conversation, but that's kind of what's been feeding into that. Why I guess I've always kind of stuck with that.
I think that's great. Jake Barnes has always talked about covering his dummies with some sort of carpet or something, so that way it's not bouncing off of plastic.
Yeah.
So that way it does feel a little bit more natural. It sounds a little bit more natural. Yeah. So I think that's a huge part of it because that's all a part of everything, right? It's whenever you deliver your loop, a live steer on the dummy, you know what it should be like.
Yeah, you want that feel, right? Yeah. Like you're wanting that feel, and then you're wanting to be able to give yourself that feedback, correct?
Yeah, and then like, for me, what I do is sometimes I'll just start throwing so dang hard, and I don't know why, but it sounds, you can hear it, right? I can hear it pop the plastic.
Yeah.
And I know before I can even really think like I threw that too hard, I know like, by the sound, I need to, whatever. I need to kind of calm some things down a little bit. So I think that's a really big part of it, right? That plays a big part. The senses play a big part. I don't quite know, if you look at a visualization practice or, using your imagination, and that could go back to overtraining and stuff too. Like if you feel like you're overtraining, develop a very good visualization practice because that and that could be a whole other thing.
Did
But
you ever read the book with winning in mind?
no.
I'm not sure who wrote it, but he was a famous shotgun shooter. I think it was shotguns, but anyways, he had like a mental technique of like rehearsing,
Yeah.
and he basically would try to visualize before and after each shot that he took,
Hmm.
so he could take one shot and turn it into three.
Yeah.
And even after like a bad shot, he would still visualize a good shot, so he could
Yeah.
kind of always like reinforce it. I've played around with it. I don't know that it's the answer, but I did notice if I couldn't see myself doing it perfectly, it was really hard to
Yeah.
like. That usually meant that day if I can't see myself roping the dummy how I want, I'm gonna have a rough day here,
Hmm.
and I'm gonna be. And so that really kind of shined through. So it was like, hey, when I could start visualizing it and do it right, then it just made it easier to duplicate. So I don't know if that had something to do with it or anyways.
I think it does. I think it's a big part of it. Sun Tzu in the book The Art of War, he calls it winning the first victory.
Yeah.
You have to win the war in your mind first before you ever even go out on the battlefield. Um, Visualization is a big piece, and one of the models that I try to teach is called PETLEP, and we don't really have to go through it, but a part of that is the environment and emotions, right? You have to get those two in there. But in a visualization practice, like you should see it, obviously, hear it. You put yourself in the environment. What are the sounds? The sounds of the chutes banging, the sounds of this, the smell. So with that, you incorporate all the senses as vividly as you can to try to recreate as real as you can in your own mind. And the interesting thing with that type of research is when you visualize a movement, the exact same parts of the brain would fire as if you're actually doing it. The difference is, so you'd have parts of the motor cortex, they would fire, but it wouldn't be at a strong enough. When I say fire, I mean the neurons excite to like send a signal out to the body. So they just wouldn't do it strong enough for the body to actually move, but you still get the same sequence of patterns firing in your brain. There's some stuff they did on rock climbers. They would show rock climbers the side of a rock. And it was the same thing like with those soccer players. They would just show it there for a second. And what the more experienced rock climbers would do is immediately visualize the path they would take. But then the muscles would start to contract to form the hand grips they would need to climb the rock. And all of this was subconscious. They didn't know it was happening.
Gotcha.
So anyway, so I think a visualization practice is incredibly important, and that includes and incorporates all of the senses. As far as doing things correctly, mistakes happen. So if you visualize an error in your visualization practice, you got to fix it. Like if you split the horns, you don't stop there. You fix it. Fix it in your head, right? Fish it on. Finish the run the right way, but then go back. And yes, ideally you want to do it correct. But the thing is, if you do make a mistake in your brain, fix it in your brain. Don't just leave it hanging. But anyway, so that's kind of tying in the senses to where, yes, I think they're incorporated. Whenever you're roping the dummy, I don't quite know. I don't quite know if it would be important to go stand in the arena because that is where you would be roping the steer, right? You get the smells and maybe the same sounds, but
Well, at the end of the day, I think a lot of like what you talked earlier about this connectivity with our brain, the stronger the connectivity, the more you're going to reinforce it, right? So whatever environment you're in, if however the visualizing, like essentially you can strengthen it, would probably help. So it might be the arena for someone, or it might just whatever environment. But I think it's as long as like you could be focused, no distractions, like that's going to enhance everything, right?
Yeah.
Like that's kind of
and there's so you had mentioned or you had asked about the 20 hours and what does this focused practice look like. The first thing that needs to happen is you know what you're trying to accomplish. So this goes back to again, you understand what you're doing enough to know what it should look like and feel like. In musicians, what they would do here is before practicing the piece, they have to listen to it. They have to know enough about it to know, like, this is what it sounds like at this particular tempo and the area that I'm playing. And it would be the same thing with the dummy. It's like, oh, this is what I'm working on. This is what it should look like. And then the 100% focused attention 130 years ago, a psychologist, William James, he called it self-directed mental force. And that to me, it sounds like a very powerful term. But if I think of it that way, it is force. But if I can think, this is what I'm trying to do, then I direct certain brain cells to focus specifically on that thing. And it's that cybernetics, the target seeking. So I can direct my brain cells to think about this. And then I establish that first. And then I rope the dummy, whatever happens. And after that, it's like you don't take it off and just keep doing it. You take a second, right? Calm down just for a second. Think about it. How did it look? How did it feel? How did it
Reinforce it.
reinforce it? Yeah. And then you do it again. And the key thing is if you ever make a mistake, then you stop and you go back and you fix it. And I on the dummy, it's easy to say that and do that because that's what you're doing, right? You're just roping. It's harder, like when roping live steers. If you have this thing you're working on, and this would be like a practice blueprint if you really wanted to set up an ideal practice. If you make a mistake on a live steer, you don't run another steer until you fix it. But if you do, you're too likely to reinforce a bad habit. So you split the horns on a live steer. You go to the sled and you rope that 10 times. You go to the dummy maybe. You rope it 10 times. You go to the sled. You rope it 10 times. So you're reinforcing that habit there, that pattern there, and then you run another live steer. If you split the horns again, you go back through that.
What about for me? I won't miss, like, I'm not trying to sound bad about this, but like, let's say I'm really working on 2 coils, just really like a long score, but really aggressive open level runs or rodeo runs. I can do my catch percentages on the dummy I'm not worried about it. But on the horse, if I'm having a bad day, how much of that, like I know I can probably just go right to the ground and I'm not going to have an issue on the ground of the dummy. So how much do you think we grind it out when we're limited on our runs on our horses? And then, or do you think maybe I should step off and go rope the dummy, even if I know, like, odds are I'm probably going to catch the dummy, right?
I would. Like if you really wanted to try to take these principles and reinforce them and adopt them, I would. Because you'd have to know, like, well, what did you do, right? I mean, you missed the right horn. You didn't quite reach enough, whatever.
More than likely, it's angles of a run.
Yeah.
At that level, I would say, not fundamentals of a swing.
But what you would want to do is whenever you go to the dummy, you would need to have some way to bring that to conscious thought, because that would be the thing on like the horse.
Recreate the angles, right? Like if I had too much, for example, it's probably too much gain or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe walk into it a little more aggressively or something to recreate it, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Or, and even if you could make it harder a little bit. So maybe you run to it or, whatever the case
just exaggerate it.
And it would be something where you make the environment a little bit more challenging. And then you bring that specific thing to conscious thought, because that's what you want to try to focus in on.
And then I guess that would identify if it is an issue. Like, hey, maybe it isn't the angles, maybe it's something in my swing, and I continue to do it, and you can kind of work through it right there.
It could be, and it could, too, if you, it doesn't necessarily have to be, on the ground. Maybe you just you have somebody on the 4-wheeler or whatever, and you try it on the sled a couple of times, where at least then you're on the horse. It's more controlled. Maybe it's a little bit slower, so you can still bring things, more so to where you're thinking about them.
Yeah.
But it's a better recreation of what just happened, and if you do it, right, you do it 3 or 4 times, well, then you just go back. And it's just that process of, hey, I keep doing this. I can do it here. A lot of times, if the environment's the same, right, if you can do it in practice, but you can't do it in drill,
that's interesting.
It's something in your head. It's something in your head making you think this is harder than that, when essentially they're the same thing. But yeah, that is the process. And that's a big reason why practicing the right way isn't fun. Like, how many times you get the steers reps, you want to rope live steers. And then if somebody comes along and they're like, well, no, yeah, run 1 and then go rope the sled 5 times. Nobody wants to do that.
Yeah.
They should, but.
Well, and this probably isn't going to, I mean, this is just my opinion, but I don't, like, I think the sled is really good heading for your horses. I don't think it feels like a roping run at all to me. I think I get more out of the ground. I don't think there's like training techniques that you need the sled for. But as far as roping horns and getting feel, it's
Really?
a little bit. You can get a little bit, but I'd rather rope on the ground.
On the ground? Yeah.
Yeah, just because I can be like exact with the angles and everything. I also think outside of the stretch horns, all the horns are too small. So they just don't feel real at all, especially when I'm like really trying to go it at a high level. But there are certain times, yes, and you do need it. And I do agree. I just think like you got to be really specific to what you need, right? This is stuff that like we got to really address.
Yes.
And then I do like this, how we can slow it down but like trying to get that as close as possible, right, to what just happened. And the goal behind it is to not reinforce negative.
Yes.
And and then I think also there's a little bit with it on the mental side. Is mindfulness is probably the easiest way to just summarize it. Like it is what it is. Like it's just a miss.
Yeah.
And having that mentality. So I kind of think we got to go down this rabbit hole just a little bit, because I think missing is important. I think if I have any regrets, it would be I didn't miss enough steers, and I wish I would have tried to be a little bit more aggressive with my roping earlier on and have a lot of bad practices. And then just getting to the point where you can brush off the bad practices like I can now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really not afraid to miss 10 in a row. And it doesn't bother me. Like if I'm getting ready to go to competition, I don't try to allow that to happen, right? So I think we got to separate for sure between these like adding things and then actually preparing for competition.
Yes. And I think that's a great point too, is, before you get ready to go to a jackpot or whatever, maybe there's a couple of practice sessions where you're freeing your horse up, to where you're working on your confidence, to where you're riding to whatever shot it is you want, and that's absolutely a great point and needed. You build your confidence. You make sure everybody's on the same page. So yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, so I think we probably could go down that rabbit hole a little bit too. But as far as like managing missing, I think, what do you think is the ideal mindset, and without reinforcing it? Because I do think there's some times where it's like, we've kind of talked about it all day. Like it's okay to have bad practice. But for me, like, I'm just thinking like, if I miss a steer, like I really want to get back in the box and run another steer, and I want to do it again. And I'm really going to have a hard time. Like you're going to have to try to talk me into this, is like getting on the ground and roping the dummy. Like the more I think about it. So let's talk about this a little bit more. Cause I guess I'm just not now like afraid to miss. I've missed so many steers now. I'm like, I'm probably going to miss a few, like I'm okay with it at this stage.
Well, but I think it depends on the level you are and what you're trying to work on. You take some of the best in the world, or, a higher numbered roper, and a miss, you could miss in the practice pen for any variety of reasons, and it might not be related to fundamentals, just like what you had mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So that could be a big piece of it as well. I did this, and whatever, like I can fix it on the next one. The key thing would be that, though, is you just can't reinforce the bad. And I almost even hesitate after what you had mentioned to use the word bad. Lower numbered ropings, it would be a bigger deal because it's probably more related to fundamentals. And that is the thing, is you can't do another one to risk that mistake again, to turn it into a pattern. So let's go over here and let's reevaluate. How do things look? How does it feel? How are you doing? And then we can go over here and try it at real-time speed again. So, I think that's a good point. The level could...
Right quick, what reinforces? So, like, at the root of it, is it dwelling on it? Is it thinking about what you did wrong and then, like, feeling what you did wrong as opposed to what you did right? Because I think that's the shift for me now, if I'm just saying what I think it is I know the feel of when it's right and when it's wrong. So, when I miss one, I'm like, that's what I did. Here's the feel. So I kind of get to a how to catch process. And with golf, I don't have that. right now. So I'm like, it's really easy for me to reinforce how my
Yeah.
golf
When
game.
I say reinforcement, I mean specifically in this, doing it again, right? So if you make a mistake on one steer and you want to reduce the chances that you're going to do that same mistake on the next steer. So that would be a key differentiator is if you are good enough to where you know you're not going to like I did this or whatever, it's not that big of a deal, I'll just fix it next time. Then yeah, just wipe that one out, it just
Okay.
happened, whatever, move on. The Again, if it is more fundamental or technique or somebody that doesn't quite have that experience, then that's what I mean by reinforcing is like on this next one, you can't do that again because then now it becomes a pattern, right? You've done it 2 times in a row. So that's what I would want to try to avoid. I would want to try to get somebody to the sled or the dummy or whatever, fix that, whatever that is, and then we try again over here.
What if you're on the dummy and what do you do then? If you're having issues on the dummy, and how do you start identifying that? Is it fundamentals? Is it like, what if you don't have fundamentals? Like, what if, like, how do you start how do you grind it out on the dummy a little bit without reinforcing
It,
or,
it would go back to the feedback. So what kind of feedback are you getting? Do you have a mirror? Are you listening to it? Like, and being able to identify, are you videoing it to where maybe you do go back and you watch it and you try to identify whatever happened. The big thing would be identifying you miss one or you miss two. Well, you got to stop and think about it and like, well, what happened? What am I doing? What do I need to change? What do I adjust? And a big part of it too, like when you're working through the struggle of stuff is like I still, right, I shouldn't say what I'm about to say because it's that self-fulfilling prophecy. I have a bad time hicking a horn, right? And I know all the things, right? Roping on the gain, maybe too big of a loop, the way I deliver it, whatever. But to really figure that out, well, go to the dummy and figure out how to hickey a horn. And I'm not saying practice it. I'm not saying you're
but
practicing it,
know what it
but you got to
causes it?
know. Yeah,
Yeah.
you got
And
to
know
know.
what
Like
feel causes it.
if
Yeah.
if I do this right in my delivery, whatever, it's more likely to come around. And then you back up from that and like, okay, well, these are the steps to not do that anymore. So that's part of working through it. And it would be like if you think of a math, if anybody liked math class, you get an equation. The teacher's not supposed to tell you the answer. The teacher's supposed to help you work through some things. But it's trial and error. Like, I'm going to plug this in. That doesn't work. Now let me plug this in. That doesn't work. Let me plug this in. Oh, there it is. So now I know A and B don't work, but maybe I plug C in. And that's really what practice should be like as well. Is you're figuring it out. Like, why did this happen? Oh, it happened because I did that. And so don't do that anymore. Let's do this instead and see how that works.
So let's just we'll talk golf for a real, like, lamest terms. Because would you suggest, like, for me, if I hit hooks, like, go try to hit a hook on purpose and then go try to hit a slice on purpose and then see if you can move it straight. And the reason I kind of ask this question is my mentality is like, I'm going to attack. Like, if it's not going well, I'm just going to stay there and grind it out and try to develop some good feel. But while I'm doing that, should I try to figure out, like, hey, what's making it do this? What's making the ball move this way? What's making the rope do this? And like start developing a little bit of feel of like, hey, what does it feel like to split the horns? What does it feel like to wave off? Like, can I make myself do it to like understand that? Like, is there any benefit to that, or is there?
I think there is, especially if you don't have a clear understanding of the mechanics.
Okay.
If you know, like in the hook and the slice with golf, if you know exactly what you're doing, right? Like, I'm doing this, I can't. I need to not do that. Then you probably don't need to. But if you need to back up and break down the fundamentals to know that, well, if I hold my hand just like this, I'm more likely to hook it. So then the only way to do that is that, well, you figured it out. That, well, I'm going to adjust my hands and see what happens. Oh, that's it. That caused the hook. So let's adjust my hands this way and see what happens. If you watch, headers, all I do is head, so that tends to be what I watch. Any header I've ever seen, the best of the world, they can demonstrate splitting the horns, right? They know the mechanics, so they can show it on a dummy. And I think there's there's something to that, right? They've studied it enough. They've played with enough things where they can figure eight it. They can hickey a horn. They can split the horns. They can rope a neck. So it is that of you spend so much time with it that you figure these little things out. I can't do any rope tricks, but I think that's the thing too. If you spend so much time with a rope to where you develop such a feel that you can make it spin around and do all this other stuff, there's something to that, right? It adds to your ability to understand the results, if that makes sense, like the way it hits.
Well, and I think it takes you all the way down the rabbit hole of probably one of my favorite books is it Robert Greene that wrote Mastery, I believe, Mastery by Robert Greene.
I think so, yeah.
So he talks about just getting to this high level. And once they do that, they kind of start figuring out different ways to do the task and how to like whatever they're doing. And they kind of essentially create a new way of doing it or really like, and you see like, they're pretty generational. And I think in roping, it's held true. I think there's really only one or two guys that I've seen that I would consider that way. But how they do things really, it's incredible. And it's at a different level than everyone else. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the rabbit hole, right? Is they've just lived in the rabbit hole of what the rope's doing and just kind of have constantly been able to obsess over it and work at it and play around with it. And I think that's it at the end of the day is play around with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then this was kind of one of my big questions with this as far as like, I know, so kind of bring things back, like we're back to like the different types of practice. And I know a lot of people have jobs or like roping is kind of picked up at an older age, but then you see kids that just pick things up so fast. And what do you think the difference is between kids that are able to pick things up and maybe an adult who's a little bit older, like how they go, is it how they go about it? Is their mindset, or what do you think, some advice you would give to someone that's a little bit older that is really trying to essentially get, the most out of it, compared to like what a kid would do?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. Think of how a kid learns how to walk. There's zero verbal instruction because they don't know. They don't have the context with which to know what anything means. They learn simply through trial and error and watching. They watch people do it from the day they can open their eyes. And it's a 18-month to about a 20-month when do kids start walking? Between 18 months and 2 years old? Something like that, maybe?
Yeah. Right. I got a 2.5-year-old, but maybe, I don't know. Yeah, sure.
So if you think about that, right, that's 16 months of, I'll bring it down to 16 months.
By the way, my kid is walking. I just don't remember when he started walking. Sorry.
So think about that. That's 16 months of watching somebody do it, practicing it, right? They crawl first to develop hip strength, to develop core strength.
They're falling all the time.
They pull up on things. Yeah. They fall right. Pain is an excellent reinforcer to try something different. They fall on things, and then eventually they just kind of like walk off. Well, a big part of that is we're wired to walk. So maybe that's maybe that's not the best example, but it is that learning process. Look at how it occurs very naturally, right? They're just watching and doing.
Yeah.
If you give a kid a rope, and that's all you do, you give them a rope and they're watching somebody do it, you can't tell them verbal instructions because they don't know. And they're not really strong enough to do a lot of crazy things. So it's like there is this natural process of watching and experimenting. There's no expectation. They're not trying to they don't need to, go rope 10 steers anytime soon. They're just playing and experimenting and figuring out what works. And you can very quickly see a young kid, once they can get it over their head, right? They just have these big open swings. They don't have the strength to power it, right? They have to get their body into it a lot of times. So it's a very natural process. Now, whenever you take an adult, they have 30 years of previous experience of being a person.
They're bringing a lot of baggage.
Yes. So if somebody has learned how to throw a baseball before they learn how to throw a rope, it's tough to make that transition. They'll try to throw it like a baseball. I'm just using that as an example. Strength. They don't. A kid will kind of like use their total body to get it to move it. And eventually they refine that, right? Eventually the kids get stronger and they're able to, but they still maintain that much more open swing. An adult's going to overpower it because they don't know, right? They have all this strength. They don't have that natural movement pattern. They have this previous experience. They're used to learning through language And if you think like, try to tell somebody that's never swung a rope how to swing a rope, it's hard to verbalize. So that's kind of the big thing there is previous experience, expectation. Like I said, a kid, they don't care. They're just swinging it around because that's what dad does. And they'll figure it out eventually. An adult, I'm going to swing it around 2 or 3 times a week whenever I rope the dummy. This is hard. I don't really like it. Why can't I throw it like this? So that's a big piece of it. I think the answer for the adult is just kind of the thing of expectation. Understand it's going to take a long time. And I learned this too, dealing with injured clients and patients way back years ago, like to try to reteach somebody how to walk, very incredibly difficult because you have to think through those things. Whereas a kid, you don't think through them; you just kind of do them. So I think that's kind of the big thing right there is you have to overcome all this previous experience to try to develop something like a swing.
And do you think maybe having like that kid type of mentality a little bit as far as like enjoyment and bringing that in and like having some fun with it, like hey, you can be serious and like we can even set goals, but it's like I think you can make the environment enjoyable, and I think the more relaxed it is, it obviously at certain levels it's probably going to get more and more intense. But if it's still a fun environment, I think like that positive side, you do see a lot of people get a lot out of it, and a lot of enjoyment. And it can't even make it to where the struggles are not even that bad. Like it's not fun, but it's still like, hey, it was still a good day. Like, and maybe is that kind of something you would suggest too with it as well, as like having that kid mentality of having fun with it?
Yeah, for sure. Especially for the adult, right? And the having fun with it, when you bring kid mentality, again, we could just keep on talking, but when you go back to what you said about mastery, there is this cyclical pattern, and I think we had talked about this briefly, but in that book, Zen and the Art of Archery, so that guy describes it as the master becomes the beginner again, and you might read it somewhere to where the master becomes childlike, but the thought there is you gain this new perspective to where you start to look at things with childlike eyes. Children,
you're learning from it all. Like you don't know anything really. Like you're not bringing.
Not as much not knowing anything.
Okay.
It is you don't know any limitation. And
Gotcha.
This would be the master that makes that next step and revolutionizes, creates a new way to rope. The childlike eyes is, there's no limit. There's no limit to what I can do here. I'm looking at this from a fresh perspective. I have no expectations. All I'm doing is trying to play with it. And that would be the same thing with the adult too. Like, yeah, you create that sort of a childlike perspective of that. No expectation, right? I don't care how you do. You just go out there and have fun. When you look at like that transition from crawling to walking, whenever a child does that, they don't ever think I'm leaving the bad habit of crawling, right? It's just their eyes are open to walking. They do it. And it's the same thing over here is, I'm not trying to I don't believe in trying to break bad habits, right? All you do is you leave it, right?
Create
you just
a new
move
one.
on.
Yeah.
You move on to walking, and crawling is left behind. It's not something I do anymore. So kind of that too, where it is that enjoyment, fun, no expectations, do this or do that. And, if you keep at it, you'll eventually figure it out.
Okay. All right. So last question I kind of got, or topic I wanted to go into, is sustained focus. So, even tying it back to our 20 hours of deliberate practice, right? And we're like really into it, but also right with it, I've bounced around with this a lot. I've talked to a lot of guys. Some guys are like, I'll run 30 steers. Some guys, I'll run 80 steers. For me, there was always a spot in my days. It was right around 4 to 5 hours, and it seemed like the most steers I could run in that time would be about 35 to 45 steers. Sometimes I could run more, sometimes less. But right around 30 to 40 steers, my mental focus dramatically drops. And it's like I went from working at my roping and being really sharp to whatever I wanted to improve on my horses. Like whatever I wanted out of the day, those were my best times. To the end of the day, anything past those numbers, they dropped off. And I was just going through the motions. And I don't know if that's a skill that I could practice and like get better at. I talked to a lot of guys that mentioned real similar things. There are some guys though that love to just run and they can do it all day. So maybe they've kind of refined that skill, or like what do you think about sustained focus for practice?
It's hard. It's very hard to do, and it appears to be generational as well. The younger generations they have reduced attention spans, reduced ability to concentrate and focus.
That's going to be my excuse.
Well, there's some very sad evidence that they are permanently losing
because of social media, probably.
Yeah. It is the social media and the scrolling of stuff, right? To where they don't have to. They don't have to focus on anything.
Just constant dopamine hits, rewiring the brain.
Yeah, I have a 5-year-old and a 22-year-old, and the 22-year-old is worse because like her last several years for sure, it's all social media, right?
Yeah.
You barely have a conversation with her.
Yeah.
Because I'm not quite as fun as Instagram. But I can have a conversation with her. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot that goes into focus. It could be different per day. It's going to depend on your sleep. It's going to depend on how you feel. It's going to depend on a lot of different things.
What you ate that day, like yeah.
Gotcha. And what I would say is do what you can. Definitely don't overdo it. Amount of time, number of steers, I'm not sure. I would encourage people to run a steer. Should be a couple of minutes. You run the steer. And at least for me anyway, right? I want to sit there and I let my horse relax between runs. I want to think about it. What went well, what didn't go so well. I'll talk to my healer. I rope with a kid not too far from me quite a bit. How was it? What could I do better? Like all that type of stuff. And so all of that takes a couple of minutes. All of it's focused on improvement. And so if you're running a steer every 3 or 4 minutes, well, it takes some time, but it's somewhat relaxing in that there's time between runs to kind of take a second. The same thing we talked about, right? You give your brain just a little bit of a break, but you stay focused on the overall task. So I think if you take an approach similar to that, not saying I'm perfect, but similar to that, then it drastically reduces the number of steers that you can run, but the quality of each run is much higher, and that would really be what you focus on. If you can only run 10 steers, maybe because you only have one horse, maybe because you're limited in time, but those 10 steers get 100% of your focus, that's far better than running 30 with half focus. And that's the muscle memory thing too, is people think repetition. No, mindful repetition is far more impactful. So that would be the thing. It's tough to know exactly what it is for the person.
Right quick, when you say 50% focus, can you give me some examples of what 50% focus would look like? Like what would you be lacking exactly?
I would think, so I think the thing that I see the most, and it would be tough to really say,
just some generalizations of it.
What you're doing between the runs. So what does between the runs look like for you? Is it talking to your buddies about whatever you did at work? Is it checking social media? Is it like, are you sort of distracting yourself from the main goal in between runs? And again, I'm not saying that that's bad necessarily, but that could be a demonstration of, I can't really stay all in focused right here, so I'm going to distract myself over there.
So let me run a scenario through you right quick then. So like, for example, I would call it being present. So if I run a steer, I usually have like little mental notes that I make throughout the run. Mm-hmm. Like my horse felt like this, like he may have, like I might want to do this, my loop hit like this. So as I'm kind of coming back, I'll have, all right, this steer, we're going to do this on this horse. Because it's really hard to have a game plan of like, all right, I'm going to ride this horse like this day, and he's going to be perfect.
Yeah.
It's a lot of like, this is where we're going on our horse. We just don't know when we're going to get there. Like you might have some days where it goes great. You might have some days where you need to do a lot for them.
Yeah.
So that seems to be like a lot of me being in, and I guess the difference would be like, hey, if your horse kind of moved a little bit with the gaits and you missed it and you are not thinking about that and you come back and you run another one mm-hmm. and you let him move again, then you're letting him reinforcing moving with the gaits as opposed to addressing the issue.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's going to be the difference between maybe a lapse in focus and kind of being all like very present in the moment, mm-hmm. right? Is that mm-hmm. those are kind of the things we're talking about, is like Or for example, if we want to make a run in the middle of the arena, like that's where we want to make it, and we went a swing or two further than we should have, or like maybe you're a little too aggressive and didn't handle the steer the way you wanted. Like those little things, like making those notes and like fixing that. Is that kind of what we're thinking?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
And whenever you bring up the horse, the horse is always an unusual element, right? They're gonna have their own set of behaviors. Horses learn much differently than humans learn. So that's one of those pieces that it's tough. It's tough to know for sure, right? I mean, my suggestion again, if we go to like amateurs, an amateur roper needs to buy the very best horse they can that gives them consistent practice.
Yeah.
As you start to ride other horses and do other things, that's variable, and it's just something that has to be factored into that. I don't know exactly how, but like you said, being present is a great way to put it, because maybe you do need to back off of what you wanted to do to make sure you're doing the right thing for your horse. So I think those are great points.
Yeah. And I think that ties right into why it probably 10 years is a good rule of thumb, because roping practice is so hard to get structured out properly.
Yeah.
Because of that variable, right? There's just so many things. But really, I think it's kind of tying back to the focus is there ways to like, yeah, I guess you'd make mental notes of like, all right, I'm now losing my focus. I'm now like talking and I'm not really thinking about it, or I'm missing little things and I'm kind of making some mistakes. And I think, I mean, I don't mind the idea of just grinding through that stuff, because I do think you do learn some things. Like you do eventually kind of almost sometimes maybe you might get in a little bit of a flow state and you feel something on a horse and then you're like, oh, I just felt that.
Yeah.
And you might have been going through the motions, but I think that just kind of ties back into reps, right?
It does. And whenever you mention, like the horse element, and I'm not a horse trainer, but horses respond better to the repetition. Maybe not better, but horses respond to repetition. So maybe in a practice session, you have 10, 15, 20 runs that are all you're focused on what you need to focus on. And that's it, right? So you're getting the feedback, you're making these changes, you're doing this. And then after that, then you turn your focus to the horse.
Yeah.
And you're not working on you, you're acknowledging that, and you're doing whatever, right? You're kicking to the hip, whatever the case may be. But that is like an acknowledgement of, this is focused. I'm not saying you have to go around and tell your buddies like, hey, this is what I'm going to do, but to yourself, it's like, well, these last 20 steers, this is going to be for the horses. So I recognize I'm not pushing myself outside of that comfort zone, and that's okay, because still, like you still will learn things during that time, but it's, maybe just a clear differentiation between my practice, horses practice, and then you could rope, all day or whatever.
Absolutely. Like I think the structure that I kind of have used is, once I've got a horse that I think is like very realistic or one I'm competing on, there's either like he doesn't need any practice at all, and it's just like, all right, I got to keep his muscles up, like keep him in shape, and then one or two for me, and then a couple for him.
Yeah.
And then the horses that are still needing a little bit of both, it's like I try to beginning and end for them, the middles for me, and some horses I run 4 or 5, 6 on. Some I can run more on. It just depends at like how hard they got to run and all that. But I think like getting some structure in your mind, like it might not go exactly like that. Like you might find that this horse is going to let you run a few extra, or this horse is not, and you got to work on them a little bit more that day. But having that structure and that game plan, and then I think doing that consistently, you can add a lot to it, right?
Yeah. And when you mention focus, there's a couple little things that you can do to enhance your focus. And sometimes I feel like these are, it's not like you're going to notice huge boost in focus, but just kind of little things that I think are interesting. And one is being a little bit hungry yourself, right? So we're kind of wired. If we have a full stomach, well, our body kind of goes into this rest and digest mode. However, if I'm a little bit hungry, then my body is more alert. I'm wired to find food when I'm hungry. So if I'm a little bit hungry, I can focus better. I can pick up on nuanced movements better. And I'm not saying starving to death, but not on a full stomach. There's a little thing that Huberman talks about with blinking. So when you blink, it's kind of like closing the curtains on like a show if you go to a play. So each time you blink, it's like you're resetting the stage for a different act. So, and again, I know it seems silly, but maybe something to try. If you could work on not blinking during a run to where it's essentially one frame of information that you're saving to your brain instead of blinking to where you're resetting that frame each time you blink. And maybe on the dummy, right? You just practice keeping your eyes open as you rope it and then blink. And Huberman even talks about he will.
And this is Andrew Huberman's podcast or Huberman Lab.
Yeah.
For reference on that.
Yeah, and he'll even talk about he practices not blinking for periods of time, and he says, don't do it around people because they think you're weird. But I think it's interesting, but it's one of those things of like, hey, if I can, I feel like, I'm 44 years old and just getting started back. I'm late to the game. So if I can not blink a little bit and maybe have better focus, I'll try not blinking a little bit and maybe try to rope a little hungry.
Right. Well, and I think roping hungry, there's probably at this point, there's a lot of data out there being in like a state of ketosis. Like you're basically, how you're getting your energy levels are a little more consistent. So like fasted days, like they talk about energy levels being better and things like that during fasted periods, meaning like fasted, like eating in a 6-hour window. So for 18 hours of the day, you're not eating, you're just drinking liquids. And during that, a lot of data is showing better mental clarity, focus, energy, all of it is higher. So, you think about it, big meal, you're pretty tired, want to take a nap, and that's lack of focus. Like I notice like I'll probably need caffeine or something if I when I rope, I don't eat lunch just because I was after lunch, I'm tired and I don't want to do it. So I just skip. But that's just kind of me personally, but
and the not sure if we really want to get into it here, but maybe just to mention, I think one of the absolute worst things for learning is alcohol. So if you're, and this is not, if you go to an event, it's different conversation. If you're trying to improve and get better and you're trying to focus, the alcohol immediately suppresses activity in all areas of the brain. So you cannot learn, or at least optimally, in the presence of alcohol. So I would say at least go rope at a time when you're not, go practice at a time when you're not going to drink. If you could not drink a little bit after that would be ideal because your brain's still trying to make these connections. But at least during that 1, 2, 3 hour period, anti-alcohol, just, let your brain keep its heightened state of activity. So that way, again, like we said, it can make these connections. It can figure things out much quicker than if something is suppressing its activity.
Okay. So alcohol will kind of, essentially it's a depressant, right?
Yes.
So it's obviously affecting your brain.
Yeah.
I know it's legal in a lot of states now. Do you have any information on like cannabis? Because I know it affects your brain quite differently, right? Like it's...
I don't with cannabis and learning. The only experience I have with that really, or only thing I know is having students, having undergraduate students that use it and then come to class and they cannot concentrate or pay attention. So I'm not going to say that they're doing it the right way, but I don't.
It obviously affects motor skills, and I don't know what book I read it, but they kind of talked about like anytime you add a stimulant in, you're adding a variable that you can't control. So if that, whatever it is different at times, your performance is affected and you really don't have control over it. And I think that's kind of rule of thumb. And I think, you can get as serious as you want about it to like what you eat, how, like getting on a schedule, like you can manage all that. And I think there will be benefits. I don't even think if you got really strict on how you ate, managed it well, you'll see benefits. And there's different ways you can handle it. It's just as serious as you want to kind of go down that rabbit hole, and as disciplined as you want to live with it, right?
Yeah, it is. And I know, back to the alcohol. I know a lot of people drink, and I wouldn't, I'm not trying to say don't, if you go, like we said, if you go to the practice and it's more of that naive practice, you enjoy it, you want to relax, hey, that's fine. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. But it is, hey, that person, like, I want to get better, right? I want to do whatever I can to improve. That would be the person like that. Any sort of a substance that alters motor skills, I would try to get it out just so you can learn it. Once you learn it, and once you get to a particular level, substances don't seem to have as big of an influence. But it's really in that learning process, right? The learn with as fresh of a brain as you can manage at that time.
Right. Do I know I've like read it a few times. Like I've heard like hockey players in professional games back in the day would have a beer in between like in between periods and stuff like that. Is there much data out as far as like once you've reached a high level, how it affects performances?
I don't know that there's any data.
No one's really trying that out too much.
Not anymore. I mean, you're right about back in the day, right?
Yeah, this is yeah.
Yeah, and I can't remember what I read recently.
I mean, there's still some team ropers at a pretty high level doing it too, I'm sure. But
it was in the NFL. I think it was the NFL. Maybe it was baseball. But anyway, at the end of the game, it showed pictures in the locker room, and there were just pitchers of beer lined up.
Yeah.
Maybe that was during the game, actually. But so in performance, what happens with alcohol, it suppresses activity. It's a depressant, right? So a lot of times, whenever we go to a jackpot or whatever, we overthink things, right? People get nervous, the anxiety, and that impedes our performance. And what people will do is, hey, you have a few beers, and guess
chill
what?
you out.
Guess
Yeah,
what?
calm
Like,
you
hey,
down.
I roped better. Maybe you just thought you roped better, or B, yeah, you kind of calm yourself down, and then performance does seem to I don't want to say increase, but because I'm not condoning that, but it is like if you suppress all this activity, then sometimes you can perform better. So there's that. We just know that. That's just how alcohol affects the brain. But it's going back to just the improvement in the practice, and that whole idea of trying to be better. That's whenever
Right.
I would say absolute no. At the performance, I mean, I don't recommend it when you go to a roping. But sometimes that's what you see. It's like, well, I kind of get myself out of my own way after I have a few beers, and I rope better. There can be some truth to that.
I mean, I agree. There's definitely some truth to it. I think I just kind of go back to it is like you're adding a variable in like, well, what does 3 beers do? Okay. Well, that was good. What does 4 beers do? And then like, okay, I fell off my horse. So like, like maybe not 6, maybe it's 2. And it's like, all right, like this is clearly an issue in your head. And this is like something that should be addressed, not something that should be like a Band-Aid on. You know what I mean? So that's how I tried to look at it.
Yeah, I think that's an important part too. Like if it is an anxiety issue, figure out how to deal with that anxiety. Maybe that's what you need to work on in your practices. Maybe you work with a sports psychologist or read some stuff on it and figure out how to manage it, because that's going to, again, create that foundation to take you far, far further than if you just mask it with some type of a substance.
Yeah, because I think one other thing is like take it down the road of like you get in a big situation where you back in the box for a lot of money.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't want to drink beer to do this. And then you miss that steer and you've got to deal with it. Or if you do have a few beers and then you miss that steer, then you got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's a pretty destructive road, I think, at that stage. So I think it's like just being pretty purposeful of like, I'm as prepared as I can be, believing in yourself, and being able to really embrace that at that moment, and then put that, live or die on that sword. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's a big piece. Like positive affirmations, especially on game day, is when you go in, it's that I am as prepared as I need to be. Whether you are or not, it's not true. It doesn't matter. You have to convince yourself that I'm as prepared as I need to be. Was it Friday Night Lights where they always said, "Clear eyes, full heart, can't lose"? Did you ever watch that show?
I don't think I watched Friday Night Lights.
But I like that, right? Clear eyes, full heart, can't lose. And that's really the truth, right? So I have the best brain I can have coming into this performance. It's not altered in any way. I have a family at home that loves me. I can't lose, right? I already beat those two things, so it really doesn't matter how the performance goes. But that's a big piece of that performance anxiety as well. If you have these things, The winning doesn't matter. That doesn't change who you are as a person.
Right.
You have everything else aligned the way you need it or want it.
I like it. Well, I know we've touched on a lot here. This
Yeah.
has been a pretty good rabbit hole. Do you want to add anything right here? I know we kind of 3 stages, but we just of practice, and I really, kind of wanted to get into it all. And I know it's obviously something that everything can kind of be a whole can of worms. So I wanted to go as deep as I could, and with kind of keeping it in a timely manner. So I got to give you some time.
I think it was good. It was a great conversation. I think we covered the main things. What I would encourage people watching, listening, or whatever is I don't have all the answers. I hope I didn't act like I had all the answers. I don't. What I hope to do is present this and get the information out there to create more awareness, and then people can decide like, hey, there's more to this than I thought. So maybe I do look into it a little bit more. Maybe I try to learn more. Maybe there is a way I can adjust my practice, because there usually is. And like I said in the beginning, I'm not saying that by doing these things you'll be a world champion, but I do know that you can substantially improve your performance from wherever you are by trying to integrate a couple of these things in there. I'd mentioned a couple of times about research and stuff like that. There's no research on team ropers. I would love to do some. I've written a couple of proposals, but it seems like when I talk to people that I think should care, they don't really. So that's kind of like, well, people don't really want to do research on team ropers. Even team ropers don't want to. But if anybody does want to, I would love to try to get some more information to figure out how we can refine this. So I'm definitely open to that. I had mentioned, I don't have an ebook or anything like that I'm trying to sell. I would love to write one. I've written a couple of outlines. So if anybody out there wants to collaborate to do that, I'm happy to do that as well. So there's a lot here. We can take it a lot further if anybody wants to. Is really what I want to say.
And I think the other thing is there's a lot of research on it.
Yeah.
If you want to, I know like Harvard's got a study on it, and there's quite a lot out there on like deliberate practice and how it really does kind of shine through in a lot of sports and elite performers, right?
Yeah.
So I think we'll try to give some references and some things like that too, some links, and then anything like you suggest with that too. I think that'd be good for anyone that kind of wants to dive down that rabbit hole a little bit more too.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if we provide my email or something. I think you did, but I'm happy to talk with people, work with people. I say work with people. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a sports psychologist, but I can play one.
Yeah.
I can work with somebody to try to figure out a better way to do things. If you ever see me at the jackpot, I don't hear that well. A lot of people think I'm a bit of an a-hole because I don't really talk, but it's mainly because I can't hear. But if anybody wants to come up and chat, I'm happy to do that as well. So open to talk and collaborate and do anything.
So we'll throw your email on the description as well too, if someone wants to get in touch with you. And
cool.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it as well. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to keep up the whole time, so it was there was a lot. Your knowledge is awesome. So thank you so much.
Good. You're very welcome. Thank you.